You got this week and next week. You probably have about 15 to 20 hours to get this first paper done. So it's probably 3 to 4 hours a day that you got to put into it. Some of y'all working pretty long hours, right? So you might be cramming it all into a weekend, but or you might get 70% of it done, you turn it in, and you'll have a chance to fix some of it later in the semester, but you get as much as you can. But this is not a class where the Friday before the papers due, you're going to put in a 24 hour. It's just not going to work. There's no way your brain can handle that much. All right. So it's kind of scary, but to me, it's kind of exciting to see if you can actually do it. Can you discipline yourself to do this type of work, because this is what we do in finance? And if not, then, you know, you have to figure out a different career approach. All right. No comments, no questions? All right, we are recording, right? Okay. So let me do a quick summary on Porter's one last time, and we'll look at a couple of papers. I'm going to show you a paper from last year. So I do want Porter's to be central to your paper. It should be 70, 80% of your paper one. So I really want you to force yourself into that. Always step back to the question you're answering with Porter. All right, because I get a lot of students that do Porter, and then it's like they did Porter just as an academic exercise, but you're doing Porter for a very specific purpose. So why did Porter write up this template? He's asking the question, which industries are attractive and which ones are not attractive. And in finance, attractive means growth. We want growth in earnings, growth in revenues. So that's what we're after, growth. Is this a growing industry or not? Now, I use the word profitability there, but it really is growth. And then the second thing is, how are the players situated within that industry? So those are those competitive strategies. Is there a cost leader? Is this a very differentiated industry? And if so, how is it differentiated? Is it the products themselves, like in semiconductors, they all have a different focus? Is it marketing, like Nike versus Adidas? You know, what is it that differentiates these products between each other? Is it service? Is it location? So that's what you're trying to figure out. Is this an attractive industry? And then how is the industry organized between the competitors? All right. So on industry attractiveness, you have the 5 forces. So you can just you know, you do the introductory. Here's my industry. Here's how it's defined. Here's the key players. A lot of students do that. Here's the key players. Some students do it as they just list them and talk about them. I prefer, you can find some way to do a table. So here's the 5 key players. Here's how you distinguish between them. You know, that kind of thing. You know, Walmart's the cost leader. Costco's the membership leader. Amazon's the online king, or whatever you want to say. Target's kind of the millennial kind of soft touch, whatever you want to say. But some papers, and you'll see them, I'll show you one today, they just go through and say, here's what Intel does, this is what they're well known for, here's what NVIDIA does, they're known for this, Texas Instruments does this. Does it in paragraph form. It's a little tough to read that because it's a lot of verbiage, but you can certainly do that. And then you can just, at the end of that section, you've introduced your industry and you can just say, I'm now going to use Porter's 5 forces to understand the attractiveness of this industry. Everybody knows Porter 5 forces, so you don't have to tell me who Michael Porter is. You don't have to give me the history of it. So it's one of those things everybody knows. So you just say, I'm now going to do Porter's 5 forces, and you're into it. All right. First, I'm going to do entry barriers. So what are you going to do in entry barriers? In the class notes, I give you a few of the ones I thought might be important. Economies of scale. That's also one of the economic modes. Proprietary products. So you have some type of license or brand or patent, something that protects it. Brand identity. That's also one of the macro. Just forgot the word. Modes. Economic modes. Capital requirements, that's economies of scale, but the capital requirements, government policy, that's for utilities, protect you, get a lot of protection. There are government protected monopolies, so, you know, those kind of things. Do you do all of these? Well, no, but you pick the ones that you think make the most sense to you here. So if you're doing NVIDIA, It might be your knowledge base. You've got so much knowledge of this particular thing, whether it's AI or whatever you're doing, that gives you a huge advantage over the competitors. Threats of substitution, you might, let's say that doesn't apply to your industry at all. Maybe you're doing semiconductors. You say, I don't think substitution threat applies. Just list it and just say, I don't think this applies to my industry. Or if you think it does, but it's not that big of a deal, so maybe you're doing clothing, and so someone mentioned, I'm doing new clothing, but maybe used clothing, the secondhand clothing isn't threat. Maybe talk about that a little bit, but then you show a chart that says secondhand clothing is 2% of the industry. So it's not a big threat. It's not that important. You go on to the next one. You don't see any signs that it's going to suddenly become a big threat. So you quickly get off of it, or you just mention it, that it's not important for your industry, you get off of it. Or maybe it's central to your particular product. You have to decide that. I put switching costs in there. I don't think switching cost belongs there. Switching costs really belongs on the buyer power. So I don't like that. So I should have moved switching costs down here. So definitely you want switching costs under buyers and under suppliers. Buyer power, if you're doing defense, you've got one huge buyer called the US government. That's going to be a big part of your paper. So if you look at the General Dynamics, one of the first papers, he does a really good job of talking about government budgets for defense around the world. Really, really interesting. China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, does a really good job on that. That's data that's not that difficult to get. You can find a lot of good charts that shows, it is one of the charts that I've seen a lot is US military spending versus the entire rest of the world. And the US still dwarfs everybody else, even though China and the others are starting to spend more. So buyer volume, buyer information, buyer profits. If your ultimate buyers are in financial difficulty, then that makes your industry weak. So if your ultimate buyer is a US consumer, then how's the US consumer doing? Right now, they're pretty strong, right? They're getting all this money from the government. They've been saving a lot. They got all this pent-up demand. Employment's improving quite significantly. You can talk about the buyer there. I'll give you some examples of that here in a little bit. Buyer decision maker incentives. That's where I was talking about the switching costs. There are industries like pharmaceuticals. I don't know if any of you are doing that. I've talked to some pharmaceuticals, and it's got some ethical issues of kickbacks and incentives to get buyers to buy based on certain things. There's certainly that as part of the analysis, but switching costs I think is a big one I left out of there. Supplier power, again, supplier concentration. If you've got one major supplier and it's a big part of your business, then that's not good for your business because you're completely beholden to that one supplier. It's essentially a monopoly. Some of y'all are sensitive to these, I forget the name, boy, I always lose terms, precious earth or whatever it is, cobalt, coming out of Sudan or whatever, where you're really reliant on one particular input. If you're doing electronic vehicles and you're really sensitive to this one input and it comes to this really, really dangerous part of the world, that is something you can certainly talk about. If you have a supplier and what they're supplying you is not that important to their business, that's usually pretty good. You can probably, you can kind of slip by and get a product at a low price. Cost of supplier's input relative to the total cost. How important is the supplier input to the industry's product? How differentiated is the supplier's input? And then here's where you're going to talk about labor issues on their suppliers. I think every single one of y'all should be having a discussion on labor issues under supplier power. I don't know if any of y'all think you have an industry where labor is not an issue. I just can't imagine that wouldn't be the case. Robbery within the industry. So the worst thing you can have is an industry with a lot of players, heavy capital requirements, not much growth. That's an industry just going to clobber itself. That's the airline industry, right? That's just a horrible, horrible industry. A lot of players, not much growth. Now you could say airlines have growth because of China and other things, but not a whole lot of growth in the developed world. And heavy capital requirements. That's an issue. Overcapacity issues. Some of the industries, there's just too many players. There's too many participants. How concentrated is it? How balanced? This is something where you could bring in, if you can find it in Statista, I've seen this in Statista where they'll show Walmart, Amazon, Costco, Target, everybody else. So you can see the concentration. Or if you know these are the 5 biggest players in my industry, go to Capital IQ and bring in the income statements for those companies and just bring in their revenues, say 5 years ago and today, and just see if there's a shift. Now it's a little tough, like with Amazon. Look at Capital IQ. I haven't looked in a while, but does Capital IQ break out the retail from AWS? Because you definitely don't want to compare Amazon, including AWS, to Walmart. That wouldn't make sense. But if you can somehow break out the retail, then just see what has the shift been. Was Walmart, if you take the top 5 players, was Walmart 30% 5 years ago, and now they're 23%? You know, what is that shift? Those are pretty easy things to do if you have major players in your industry. So there are ways to do it. It's easy to do it with Bloomberg as well. With Bloomberg, you can bring in all the players and just take their revenues. And if you find that the top 5 or 80% of the industry, you can take those 5 and do a pie chart, and then you do the other 20% as a piece of the pie chart, just other. And what I love to do is you do that today versus 5 years ago. I think that's really, really interesting. If you can, it depends on the industry. If the industry has a lot of new people coming in all the time, that makes it more difficult. But that's really easy to do. Now the FSC will be open anytime I'm here. So tomorrow, I don't know if I'm not planning on coming tomorrow, but if y'all want me to come tomorrow, I'll come tomorrow. If y'all need some Bloomberg time. And is anyone here like really desperate for Bloomberg time? Here, you really need me up here. I'll make special trips if y'all need me to. I don't mind doing that. I own a Prius Prime, so I'm always having to plug it in. I don't like, only bought gas once in the last 18 months. So I'm like, once you buy one of those things, you never want to buy gasoline the rest of your life. It's just an amazing thing. So I've gotten this new, I'm obsessed with it, but I can plug in my car and come up here. I don't mind. But I'll be here Thursday. I'll probably get here Thursday around 1:30 or so and open it up. I have a class from 2:30 to 4. And then from 4 until our class starts, the only thing I got to do is eat dinner. So anytime anybody want to be here Thursday between 4 and 7:30, get some data from Bloomberg, William. Okay, and Aaron. Yeah, if you want to, or if you're like, I don't know what this Bloomberg thing is, and set up time and I'll show you. I'll wear a mask and I'll sit down with you and I'll show you how to use the Bloomberg machine. About 5 of them are working out of the 12 we have. So we probably can't get 10 people in there, but we can get a few. So let me know. How many of y'all are using Capital IQ right now? Y'all, Fernando. So yeah, it's pretty good stuff, right? Pretty quickly to put that in there. We had one student email Natasha thanking her that. I don't know if any of the rest of y'all did that, but yeah, I mean, it's great that we have that kind of stuff. It's nice to thank her just to be nice, but also a reminder that we're using this stuff to keep paying the millions of dollars that she's paying. You're already paying for it, right? It's part of your student fees, so you should be using this stuff. So you have all this data. Now the question is, can you figure out how to use it for paper 1? So for paper 1, revenue is a good way to do it. Bring in the revenue of several companies and just see how has it changed over time. All right. So Porter's 5 forces. You might go to Wikipedia for Porter and see the full list of everything he lists under buyer power, and just go through the list and see if it hits something. Say, yeah, you know, that's something I should talk about. Don't go through and think I got to talk about every one of these things. That would be ridiculous. That's just overkill. But there might be one you just never thought about. It's like, yeah, man, that would be a really good angle to take with this particular industry. All right. And then in paper 1, you might do the strategies. Does my industry have a cost leader? So I think with retail, I think Walmart is the cost leader. But I think there's a focused cost leader, which to me is Dollar General. And to me, Dollar General stores, they're a focus where they're the neighborhood, kind of, within a few minutes of someone. And then to me, Costco is the membership one. I think Costco beats Sam's. I haven't been in a Sam's in a long time, so I don't really know. It seems like Walmart is kind of, does Walmart even advertise Sam's anymore? Do y'all have TVs and see Sam commercials? I don't really notice Sam's. I don't even notice them on the roads anymore. The Sam's? Really? Oh, okay. Well, what's the difference between Sam's and Costco as far as the membership? Is Sam's the same price? Do y'all know? Very similar. So, so you have there where is there really a cost leader, or are they almost identical? How can you really tell a difference? So Murray Porter says you can't have two cost leaders, but then you got Sam's, Costco, and Walmart, which, two stores and three, so what does that mean? So is there a cost leader? And if there's more than one cost leader, usually that means there's going to be a fight to the death, and one of them will win. But that's what he says. There can only be one cost leader. But some of your industry, I don't think there is necessarily a cost leader in semiconductors necessarily. I can't really think of one. I don't know that industry that well. So yeah, there's a Costco fan club going on. I'm a big Costco fan as well, but to me, Costco is like I join once every 5 years and buy everything, and then I cancel. So that's it. All right. And then the differentiator. I really think paper one has a place for differentiation. I think it goes under the rivalry within the industry, because I think differentiation reduces rivalry. If your customers see you very uniquely, that protects you from the competition. So I do think that belongs. So the question is, how do they differentiate themselves? And I gave you some ideas here. So what is it that they do that really makes them unique in the industry? So like Jabari, I'm not sure if real estate, you can take that angle, but real estate really differentiates itself. Definitely with hotels you can, right? You definitely see that, but with office real estate, I just don't know if you see that, but all right. And then focus. And so, does your industry have some outliers that are focused on certain things that really, that's their thing? Like Ferrari. Ferrari is a pretty focused company, right? I would never buy a Ferrari, but there are people out there, billionaires, that do buy Ferraris. It was interesting listening to, we'll talk about this later, listening to Damodaran talk about Ferrari. What would you think the beta of Ferrari is? Just off the top of your head, without thinking too much about it. Be really high, right? And he argues it's a below 1 beta. Why would you think, why would he say Ferrari's beta is below 1? Yeah. Billionaires don't care about recessions. It doesn't bother them. A $400,000 car, when you're worth $50 billion, it's like, you don't know. You do notice the $10 billion you lost in your stock portfolio, but it's not going to, you say, oh, I can't afford my Ferrari now. So and I would think, well, Ferrari, it's a 2-3 beta firm. So that's a fairly, focused company. Now, I'm not saying Dollar General and them are focused. I don't know if you can make the argument, but I could almost make that argument. Are there culture issues going on in this industry? That probably fits more in paper 2, where you're talking about your company and how they do that. And then the very, very end, you're going to do that summary. I showed you that summary chart to try to bring it all together. And what do you think? And get back to that initial question. Is this an attractive industry, or is this an unattractive industry? And what do you think on board? Okay. You can't have stuck in the middle, where you just have a bunch of firms that you cannot distinguish between them. That's that intense rivalry. I think airlines could kind of be in that category. I know banking was in that category about 20 years ago. So you might have an industry like that. One thing to be real careful of, and I've mentioned this earlier, you're not an advocate for your company or for the industry. All right. If you don't like your company, you don't like your industry, then you need to say that. All right. A lot of students, they feel like they're supposed to sell their company. And that's not what you do. Now, the sell side has that issue. The sell side versus the buy side. There is an issue on the sell side that if you badmouth the company, the CFO stops talking to you. And there's certainly, and we had someone speak to this class a few years ago. Ryan spoke to this class, and he talked about that pressure on the sell side, that you just don't want to be negative because they do cut you off. Now he's on the buy side now, so he doesn't have that issue. But so you're writing a sell side quality report, but you're going to take the attitude of the buy side. You're going to be negative or positive on the company. So don't get bought by your company. We talked about the economic modes. So you can definitely work the economic modes in the paper one, also belongs in paper two about your company specific. But in paper one, you want to ask, does this industry have major players with strong economic moats that protects them from that rivalry within the industry? We talked about those already. And then what I liked is what that one podcast talked about is the importance of economic moats. And this is more paper two. If a firm has economic moats, you better see that reflected in their capital expenditures, of how they're spending money. They need to invest to protect that moat, and that needs to be their focus. So you tie all this together. I brought up the issue of disruptive innovation. Is there some disruption going on in the industry that you're covering? Maybe or maybe not. Now, if I'm doing auto manufacturing, I don't think any of y'all are, but if I'm doing that, is electronic vehicles a disruptor? Maybe, except for almost every car manufacturer is manufacturing EVs. So maybe it's not all that disruptive, you know. So if everybody in the industry is doing it, it's not so disruptive. So disruptive is you have a smaller player outside the industry, like Netflix was several years ago with Blockbuster, that's starting to do stuff that's causing, you know, taking away some market share from the major players. So, you know, the clothing, I don't know what this disrupting clothing. I don't know what disrupting semiconductors, you know, it's, don't think that you have to have that, but do at least ask the question. All right, so that's everything but the macro factors. All right. So it seems almost impossible to work paper one unless you do the outline and just say, I'm going to focus on this one thing and get it done. I think if you do that, that's the way I would do it. That may not work for you. I mentored a kid, he was in high school. That kid could sit down and write an entire massive research paper off the top of his head in one setting. It just amazed me. It's like, I can't do that without an outline. It's like, he would hand it to me. I was like, oh, this is going to be messed up. And it was really well done. You could do it. You might be able to do that. Your brain can just do all of that. But I have to have an outline, and then I work through the outline. So the other thing we were talking about earlier today is, if I were you, I'd also say, okay, I'm going to put 3 hours on this today. So I'm going to do buyer power for 3 hours today. I'm going to type it. I'm not going to perfect it. I'm just going to type it, put it aside. Tomorrow I'm going to work on supplier power. So this week is that first draft. And then next week is the wordsmithing, the fixing and correcting, right? Because if you go back and say, I'm going to make it perfect, then you're going to spend 10 hours in buyer power, and then you're going to be so worn out, you're not going to do supplier power, okay? So don't worry about perfection, because I'm going to let you fix some things, and you'll get a great score that you can see, man, I better go back and really fix this section. That's where I lost my most points. This paper you definitely want to put on LinkedIn, so you definitely are going to want to go back and perfect it more and more before you put it out there. So as much as you can get it, you know, pristine this first try, that's good. But if you're running out of time, just say 3 hours and I'm done. Okay, now I'm going to start working on this. All right, give yourself really set times to work on stuff. Right? Any questions on porters? Everything up to macro. We'll talk a little bit on macro.
Question on, like, when you mentioned first, there's a section that doesn't apply to your company. You said just to mention that. Do you do that towards the end of the previous section, or how
Well,
do you do that without it being?
Well, there's an order, you know, industry rivalry, I forget, well, what order I'll put it in there. So there's that general order. So you say, now I'm going to talk about porters, and just do it in that order, and just have a bolded title, buyer power, supplier power, and you just put a short sentence. If you're doing substitution, a short sentence, I don't think substitution threat applies to this industry, and you're done. Go to the next one. And be that short. You don't have to explain why I don't think it applies. I'm like that. Just, I don't think this applies. I'm doing retail clothing. I don't think there's a substitution threat. Go on to the next one. Yeah. So your board, and that's why I say that's the advantage of porters is it's so well known. You don't have to explain what buyer power means or anything. You just go right into it. So yeah, it's real nice. Boy, I wish I kept track. We would talk to 300, 400, 500 firms a year, and porters came up at least half of the time. I mean, these firms, you hear it all the time, and most of them didn't explain it was porter. They would just start saying buyer power, and it was just obvious. So that gives you an advantage when it's that well known. Everybody knows you can just start doing it. Now, value chain management is quite well known, so you can use some of that. You would have to kind of explain a little bit, but on this you don't. Does that answer your question, Javier? Other questions? I would put the whole paper on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's why I say that format I gave you, the 2 columns, and you see it a lot. Make it look as much like a professional journal. Or, on Blackboard, we'll get to this, but I give you a few examples of a sell-side research. You really want it to look as much like that as possible. Oh, sorry, I don't know where I have anything out here. So under the paper rubrics, I've got a paper 10 example sell-side reports, and I'll try to find some more. So let me go back here just a second. I'm sorry, you guys online. If I forget about you, just let me know. So I just stole a few of them from. I mean, you can get it from the UTSA library. Some Merchant Online. So here's one from Jack in the Box. So you want something that looks as much like a sell side report as possible. So I don't know if y'all seen this format before. It probably kind of looks a little familiar. Now this is the exec summary, so you don't want this format. So one thing, that's a good question, Jabari. One thing I think you really want to think about before you get too far into it is the formatting. How will you do the formatting? A lot of them, well, this one, I don't like this format down here, but I do like the first couple of pages. But one format you'll know in some of the papers is they'll do like 2 columns, but one column is narrower than the other. And they'll reserve the narrower column for graphics and the wider column for text. I think that works pretty well as long as the graphs aren't so small you can't read them. But then make sure your margins are as narrow as you can get them without, you don't want to. I've seen one where you have those 1-inch margins. It's just really unprofessional. So if I were you, I would experiment a while. What you don't want to have is you're on page 23 and then you decide, well, that formatting wrong, and you go back out to fix it. Everything goes out of whack. So do put some time to think about this. You're going to interview for jobs where your first hurdle is human resources. Human resources will not read a single word in your paper, but they're going to look and see how pretty it is because they're not finance people. And so that formatting is actually pretty important. All right. So do put some thought into that and what your approach is going to be. But look at that, short paragraphs, a lot of bolding, a lot of titles, a lot of white space in certain places, definitely. So other questions on people 1? All right, so now the macro. So you have to have something macro related. So macro means something that could apply, to the overall economy, but you want to make it something that's clearly tied to your industry. So you can start with raw materials. What raw materials do they use? Is it steel? Is it cotton? Is it oil if you're doing a refinery? So what are those inputs? So raw materials, and then you can look at the CPI of that and do an analysis of that. If you're doing transportation, I mentioned the Baltic Dry, that would be a macro event, a macro factor. If you're doing NVIDIA or semiconductor, skilled labor, I'm sure if you go on Statista and type skilled labor, you're gonna get some charts coming up. So what's going on? I mean, it's my investment class. I found them a chart on unfilled positions, and it's amazing. We just hit a record. So we got all these people on unemployment. We're still well behind where we were before COVID, and yet we just set a record for unfilled positions. What in the world's going on? It's the strangest thing. And we've also seen, you know, people worry about their jobs, and yet we've also seen a record quit rate. More people are quitting their jobs than ever before. Why? Because they're getting these huge bonuses to go somewhere else. It's a bizarre world. So what is that doing to NVIDIA and Intel and Microsoft that are having to hire these high skilled workers that are getting these big bonuses that go somewhere else? What does that mean? So skilled labor is an issue. Unskilled labor. So you could definitely put some charts up about minimum wage, if that's where you're hiring from. So I've seen more and more reports. It's the first time I think I've ever seen this in my entire life is a McDonald's offering a bonus for a worker to come work for them. I worked for McDonald's for 1 month. I worked for Chick-fil-A for 1 week. They didn't pay me bonuses to come work for them. And when I quit, they did not care. Like, yeah, good. Who were you? So I mean, that's pretty wild, isn't it? Fast food is paying bonuses to get workers.
A lot of fast food places are paying just to show up to the meeting.
Yeah, paying you just to come to an interview. Yeah, that's just crazy stuff. So I've never seen that before. I can't think, you know, I'm 58 years old. I cannot remember ever a time where fast food was really struggling to get workers to come in. Now, turnover is a big issue, and that is something you can certainly talk about if you have unskilled labor, is the turnover. And that's a Costco issue, right? That's something Costco does extremely well. You can set that up in paper one. Turnover is an issue, and yet Costco has much lower turnover. So, you know, you don't want to talk about Costco in paper one, but you can certainly set that up that that's something they do well. You know, so those are certainly issues. Labor issues provide a lot of macro factors. I'm trying to think of some of your industries now, and I can't remember which ones you're doing. CPI is a horrible one. I know CPI come out today. However, the subcategories in CPI are wonderful. The problem is there's so many of them. So if you go to the Department of Labor and you want to find, oh my word, what are some of the ones I've seen? They have everything. They have several tens of thousands of things that they track. So you go to their website. I probably should have done this for you. I don't know if I should do this in class. This is probably dangerous to do this in class. Because it really is really tough to, you have to know what word to put in there. But Department of Labor, inflation, data, I mean, I should have given you a link, but you go into it and get in down to the nitty gritty, it's page after page after page. So if you want to know the inflation of cotton that goes in the t-shirts, they probably have that number. If you don't want to know the inflation of bicycle tubes, they probably have that number. If you want to know the inflation for bananas, they probably have that. But what was frustrating to me is finding the exact word to type in to find that. So, and I don't know if you can do, you're typing cotton, what will come up. But I had some success with just trying word after word after word, and finally I could find very specific. I can't remember what I did. Oh, it was college textbooks. I think I could find the inflation rate for that. But wow, that's probably what, 80% or something, just something ridiculous. I remember I was at UT Austin, but taking 18 hours. I bought all of my textbooks, and I was like, man, that was almost $100. I can't believe I spent that much on textbooks for 18 hours of classes. That's crazy. You'd love to have one textbook under $100, right? Today's, it's ridiculous. So they have, I mean, I just talked the word cotton, all these things came up. So Statista probably has it too, but I doubt Statista goes down to the level. So this is free. This is government, Department of Labor. They have all the statistics, thousands and thousands and thousands of statistics. Many of them go back 15, 20, 30 years. I really wish I could think of the one I did for this one class. Movie tickets, statistics, you know, there's just all the place. So try to find what is that, and that's why I said go back to the raw material, the cost of goods sold for your firm. Is there something in that number that's 30, 40, 50% of their cost of goods sold that really, really drives the numbers? Okay, I don't know what that is. So inflation is good if it's specific. If you just do general CPI, I'm just not going to buy that. All right. So Jabari, you could probably find some office rent inflation for different cities. There's probably all that kind of stuff out there. You could probably find vacancy rates. You know, there's stuff out there. Give me some of your companies, and I'll give you some ideas. Someone throwing out. NVIDIA, you know, to me, skilled labor is a big one on that one. You can certainly semiconductors. I would count the what's the law? The Moore's law. You could certainly count the Moore's law as a. I would count it as a macro type of factor if you want to do that.
Would it be capital like you will see the breakdown of
The breakdown of what?
cost of goods sold?
Well, I don't know if you get much more than just cost of goods sold. I hate cost of goods sold. I wish there were a lot more detail on that. I wish they tell me how much is it labor. We were doing, remember the Facebook forecast? And Facebook has a cost of goods sold. It was like, what in the world is cost of goods sold for Facebook? Is it the servers? Is it IT employees' time? That doesn't make sense to me. What's the cost of goods sold for Netflix? So I wish I knew that. Now, if you go into their annual report, there will be a discussion on cost of goods sold, but you may not get the breakdowns. But definitely go into your company and type cost of goods sold and see what they're saying, what they put in there. You will get a discussion of it. But whether you can get the detailed line items, I don't think so. Well, Netflix, I think the macro factor there is how much digital activity there are. How much digital activity, you might do broadband. You know, broadband is key for you, right? The more broadband there is, I don't know how much broadband there is in China right now, how quickly that is, but none of y'all have had the AOL dial-up, so I'm the only one in the room that's ever done that. And you're like, you know, you dial in and you run to the store, do your grocery shopping, you mow your lawn, you come back in, and finally you're dialed in and you click on a video and you go visit family for a few weeks, you come back, the video's finally loaded. I mean, it's just crazy how slow things were. There's no way Netflix could have survived in that environment. Or Costa Rica, right? Jordan, loading stuff in Costa Rica is, you know, it takes, you get up at 3 a.m. so you can load something because it's so slow. So broadband around the world could certainly be the case. How many people have access to the internet around the world? That could certainly be a factor for anyone that's online and stuff. I mean, I can think about, you know, there's a lot of macro factors out there that are interesting. You're trying to find the one that's most important for your industry to really explain where they're going. Now, if you got the consumer, so let's say you're doing consumer discretionary, there are some really good statistics that work for consumer discretionary. I like personal income. In fact, one of my favorites is personal income versus consumer credit. It's amazing how much faster credit has been growing than personal income because of credit cards and all that kind of thing. But I think this last year, you've seen it collapse. I think you've seen a drop in consumer credit, and personal income has actually done pretty well. You can certainly look at that to see savings rates. I think would be important. The U.S. savings rate has even been negative in some years. And it's now hit some pretty high levels, not historically high levels, but high levels relative to several years. That is a good indication that people are going to have money to spend in the next few years, and that's a good indication of strength for this industry. How much buying online versus in stores, I think, is critical. If you're doing clothing, I remember 20 years ago when the internet hit, people say, well, people are going to buy, you know, movies and those kind of things on the internet, but people will never buy clothes on the internet. You have to try the clothes on, you have to fit them. Well, that's no longer true. People buy clothes all the time. You know, I know my shoe size. That's pretty easy. I can buy a pair of shoes and I don't need to go try them on. So that's changing. You might even find that how much, you know, the shift in a particular product that used to be in person, that's now. There's a great podcast on dog food, and how I saw this lady at HEB. I don't know how she got that bag of dog food into her cart because it weighed more than she did. She's probably a strong lady, got it, but people hate buying dog food. It takes up so much space. It's very heavy. So people are saying, hey, deliver it to my house. And say, well, boy, that's an interesting. Now there's websites that's all they do. Is they deliver dog food to people's sites. And he was heavily invested in this firm because he said, yeah, that's the one thing people just don't want to do. It's just a painful thing. I'm like that with my tea. I buy all these massive crates of tea. I said, you know what? That takes out half my shopping cart. Can't they just put that on a dolly and deliver it to my front yard? You know, so people are coming these things. That's almost a disruptive type of innovation. But if you can find statistics on that, the people are shifting to that. None of y'all are doing the dental companies. I thought they would be really, really interesting. Invisalign and Smile Club. That one, there's so much data on those two companies that is really, really fascinating. I just find that really, really fascinating. Well, I can't think of, what are some of the other companies? Give me a couple more. Who? Oh, energy. Well, all right, so energy, if it's natural gas or oil, you just do those commodities. So if, you know, Exxon, you can talk about oil prices. A few of you are doing, Exxon's a really hard company to do. Some of you are doing Exxon. Jacob, you doing Exxon? No, someone was, yeah, Exxon's a tough company to do because they do production, they're, you know, so let me just tell you on energy. So energy for the Exxon people, energy almost always has a discussion of upstream, midstream, and downstream. It's just always in the paper with a chart. You'll probably find an example paper out there that does that. It's just always an industry discussion. And you want to talk about the major players. And in Exxon's and all of those, that's why it's such a tough. So where's Excel and all of that? Is it upstream, downstream, and midstream? So you want to focus on that part of the industry, and that's probably what your industry is going to be like. And I don't know Excel that well to know where they fit in there. Do they produce? Are they the distribution, the pipeline, or are they getting it to the retail at the end? That's what you want to fit it into that category. But you define the industry, here's upstream, midstream, downstream, and then you say, well, I'm focused on midstream here. I'm focused on the downstream here. I always get them I think they're backwards. I think of the upstream as the downstream as downstream, upstream. I think they're backwards in my mind. So that's a pretty obvious thing to talk about. But yeah, if you're in energy, then talk about the energy they're doing. What have natural gas prices done? What have oil prices done? You can certainly talk about alternative energy and so charts on that. How much does solar energy cost? How much does it cost to do turbines? And how's competitive? Is that getting to whatever Excel does? Does Excel do any alternative energy?
They do like mostly electricity and natural gas.
So natural gas, yeah, natural gas prices have been what, $2 forever and never is pretty amazing. I remember when they hit $2. I thought, well, that won't last long. This is a good time to go short natural gas. I'm glad I didn't. That would have been a long short. Other companies, I'm sorry my hearing's not very good, so you just gotta shout it out. Yeah, Carnival Cruise. All right, so boy. You know, there's some interesting things there. One thing I've been fascinated is just the size of the boats and how they keep getting more and more massive. There may be something there. You can certainly find some statistics just on the growth in cruise travel over time. So, you know, you might think about what are the major ways people travel: by car, by plane, by boat, where are they going? So you can certainly think in terms of where does cruise line fit in the overall travel, find some charts on that. I would count that as part of the macro analysis. You could probably get away with fuel costs there. I don't know how much, anybody have an idea of how much fuel costs is the Carnival Cruise cost of goods sold? Do you think it's 10%, 30%? Is it pretty massive? I would think those boats are pretty expensive to ship around. So you might look at fuel costs. Now, you know, ESG is going to come up in paper too. Y'all know what ESG is? So cruise lines, I think, are pretty major polluters. And I think they're talking about alternative energy and alternative fuels and cutting down on carbon. So that could be a big part. And that could probably, for Excel, be an issue as well. So the carbon footprint could be one I would count on a macro if you can get statistics on that. That could be the same thing with FedEx and UPS and some of these others, you know, fuel costs and carbon footprints.
As far as growth goes, I've read something for the retail industry that say it's going to grow at 2% for the next 2 years, and some things that say it's going to grow at 6 or 7% for the next 2 years.
All right, so for something like retail, every industry, so this is what I get down the bottom, Facebook, every industry. So ultimately, you're capped at 7 billion people or 10 billion people. So ultimately, you're capped to every human on the planet, you know, ultimately. I mean, I said dog food, but, you know, you're not going to buy dog food if there's not a human owner of the dog. Dogs aren't going to buy their own dog food. So ultimately, you got to ask about saturation. So if you're doing McDonald's, Costco's, Costco's only the US, maybe Canada. What happens once Costco's within 10 miles of 90% of all Americans? At that point, how can you grow? It's inflation and population growth. That's all you got. So ultimately, I'm going to argue, ultimately, every single company in the world, their ultimate growth rate is population growth plus inflation. Once they get to saturation, that's true for Netflix, right? I mean, it's real funny listening to Damodaran. He looked at one of his students' papers, and he says, you realize you have Netflix with like 17 billion customers in the world that's going to max out at 10 billion people. Where are you going to get that growth from? He just extrapolated it. I mean, ultimately, you got to stop there. So if I'm doing Netflix is pretty tough, right? But if I'm doing Netflix, I'm going to say, okay, what percentage of the US population have Netflix, and what's the max that they can get? You know, what percentage of Netflix is a shared account among 6 people? I won't ask in this room, but that's a problem. And they're trying to fix that, right? They're trying to do something to fix that.
They're trying to do something like a check, you know, how you can't just buy it.
Yeah. And good luck with that, that they don't anger people so much that they lose
And
their
like,
customers.
well, for the US, or these markets, but Mexico, where it's, you know, 50%
And that data exists. So it's amazing to me when we're doing that Facebook. So Netflix and Facebook, you can go around the world and see how many customers they have, how many people are there, what percentage have access to the internet, is it high-speed internet. You can do that, and it's almost country by country that you can go around. Now maybe you're going to do the US, China, India, Indonesia, you know, you're going to take the big countries and then do everybody else. But on some of these countries, some of these companies, that's what you have to do. You have to figure out how saturated they are in the US, where are they going next? Are they going to go to Mexico? Are they going to Central America? Would it work there? And you just got to work through that for your company and for your industry. So, you know, I'm amazed, you know, we went to Central America. I'm amazed how saturated Walmart already is in Central America. I mean, they're just everywhere. So yeah, ultimately it's population growth plus inflation. You can't go any faster than that. So people are going to have Facebook growing at 20% for the next 30 years. They just can't do it. They run out of people. You know, it's almost like these Ponzi schemes, right? You just run out of people. You can't go any faster. So every industry ultimately is going to hit that. Now you may have a new industry comes in and they only got 0.1% of the population. Yeah, they're going to grow 30, 40% for 5, 10 years, but ultimately it stops and they just can't anymore. So even Facebook is going to be a non-growth in the industry eventually. I don't know if that answers your questions, but you do have to get down to that level of where are they, where else can they go, and how many do they have. So you might do a map when you get the paper too, where you just show where Costco is versus populations. Usually it's what percentage of the U.S. population is within 10 minutes of Walmart. And that's getting pretty high, isn't it? Like 85, 90%. It's a pretty high number. So, you know, that tells you you can't really add any more stores, and you kind of tapped out in the U.S. All right, so make sure you have to have something that's a macro factor. For a macro factor, remember the three things you have to have. You have to show some chart on the history of that macro factor. Some graphic that shows you. You've got to talk about where it is today versus that history. Are we at some extreme event, some extreme level or not? And in some indication where it's going next, that indication could be, you know what Bon was just talking about. You can be quoting some official source, some expert says this is what we're thinking. And heavier, I think, on natural gas, I think you'll be able to find a lot of people are going to talk about where they think natural gas is going. Right. So those are the three things I'm looking for. So if you can't do those three things, then it's not a macro factor. Okay. So where has it been? Where is it today? Where is it going? Making sure you've tied it to the industry. All right. That's why CPI doesn't work. CPI hits everybody. You need to be much more specific to the industry. Right, so I'm gonna be looking for macro factors. So if you're not sure, then call me or email me, Professor. I'm planning to do this as my macro factor. Then I'll say, yeah, that I count that as a macro factor, but make sure you have those three things. I am looking for those three things with that factor.
So the question, when this company that they do electricity, steam, and natural gas, right? Now, when you do macro factors, those three could it be different?
Oh, yeah.
Natural gas, because you can compare them essentially to different companies for the electricity only. That might not be the same company you compare them to steam or.
Oh yeah, there's no rules about, you know, you're trying to figure out what's most important to this industry. So this angle might make, if your industry really has three parts, then those three parts can be talked about very differently. Yeah, there's absolutely no rules in this other than I'm going to force you to use Porter's and have at least one macro factor. I can't remember in the rubric, I might have said two factors, but if you're not sure, to me, in my mind, one macro factor that you do an extremely deep dive on is worth 3 or 4 that you're higher level on. So I'm really looking at the meat of it than the numbers. Yeah. Oh yeah, commodity prices definitely. Yeah, any raw material input price works very, very well. And for any retail, demographics works really, really well. So if you do an American Eagle, I don't know the age group that buys American Eagle, but let's get myself in trouble. So I don't know who buys anything. So let's say it's mainly 25 to 35-year-olds, and maybe it's more women than men. I don't know. I have no idea. But if that's the main people that buys their product, and you think that's going to be true, the one thing we're better at forecasting than anything else is demographics. We have a pretty good idea of how many 25-year-old women there's going to be in 10 years from now. We have a pretty good, if your industry is very sensitive to baby boomers, we have a pretty good idea how many baby boomers there's going to be in 10 years. And you can just type demographics and see what comes up. Type demographics and statistics, see what comes up. So that's the one thing we're really quite good around the world. Even it's not just in the U.S. We have a pretty good database of that kind of information. So Netflix, who's watching Netflix? Are 72-year-olds, 80-year-olds watching Netflix? Are 3-year-olds watching Netflix? Are 30-year-olds watching Netflix? Who's playing? Are we having any gamers? I think we have any gamers in here. We've had gamers before, but who's playing games today? Is it 40-year-old men? Is it 7-year-old kids? You know, who's in the gaming market? So yeah, some of you are doing Microsoft, so you know who is that market, and then what's that market going to be? And the other thing you have to ask is, if it's 40-year-old men, does that mean their main market 10 years from now is going to be 40-year-old men, or is it going to be 50-year-old men? You know, how does this product move? Someone's doing Philip Morris, you know, so who's smoking in the world? Who are those people? And where are they? Is it China? Is it Russia? You know, where is that? And what are those populations doing? You know, so you've got some really demographics I will count as a macro factor, and you can find a lot of really good data for that. You can also, as a macro factor, doing smoking, what percentage of Americans smoked in the 60s and the 70s and 80s and 90s, and how is that shifting over time? And then what is that in Russia? What is that in China? You know, the U.S. is really good at exporting its vices. And so there's a lot of world that's still drinking and smoking quite heavily, even though the U.S. has been cutting. All right, so boy, I wanted to, so what we'll do Thursday night is I want to show you, I want to walk through, Thursday night we're going to finish paper 1 entirely and start getting into paper 2. But what I want to do Thursday night is walk you through a few of the company industry examples of former students. But I'm hoping you're looking at those as well. You can't plagiarize them and copy them, but you can definitely look to get ideas just to see maybe if you're missing something major. And you know, most of your industries, there's at least one paper out there that's closely related to your industry. None of the papers I put out there are bad papers. They're all fairly good papers, but they're not good all the way throughout. So some of them are really good on paper 1 and not so good on paper 3. So you got to be a little careful. But none of them are horrible, but some of them are like strong A's on 1, 2, and 3, and kind of a mediocre B+ or B on paper 3 or 4, something like that. All right. All right. Questions on what's going on here? This class always looks so stressed to me every semester, and this is a hard class. So call me. You know, you can call. I'll talk to you. I'll walk you through it. If you can survive this class, you're going to be successful in finance. So that's kind of the good thing. This is a good way to test yourself. I can't think of anyone who's done one in this class who's not killing it in finance right now. So this is a good test case to see. All right, I'll stop it there. I'll let you out 3 minutes early so you can go work on your paper. All right, so the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you need inflation numbers, you can get them from there. Let me show you how it works, because it's not the easiest thing in the world to use. There we go. All right. So it's BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics.gov, /CPI, /data, DATA.htm. So everybody get that. Can y'all see that from where you are? I don't think anyone's on Zoom with me today.
What's that?
Oh, maybe so. Oh, Brandon and Oscar. Right.
Yeah, here.
All right, sorry. I can see you right there, and so then. Okay, everybody got that? So Bureau of Labor Statistics. And when you do the data, it brings up this page. The page I like is the tables. If you click on tables, it brings up all kinds of data. Let me show you another one. Sorry. Come on. Do it. This one's a little bit lengthier. I don't know if you can see all of that, but let me copy it so you can see it. All right, so this is the query that allows you to do searches. And it's by popularity, which is actually what you want to do, because if you put in a keyword, you want the most popular on top, because that's the most likely thing for you to need. All right, can y'all write all that down or take a picture of it or something? One thing I don't like about this site is every time I get into it, it's like you just click until you find what you need. It's purely random. It's not like obvious what to click onto, so it's a little bit frustrating. All right, everybody got that? So let me show, when you go into that site, if you don't have anything in the search, it just brings up CPI. So CPI is not a good thing for to use for your project, but let's look for something. Here's one I did. Let's do apparel. All right, so you type the word apparel, hit enter. Apparel in the US, city average, all urban consumers seasonally. That makes good. Look at the second one. They have CPI for apparel in Seattle. So they get really specific. On the word apparel, they have 177 databases with the word apparel in it. Okay, so it's pretty extensive. If you click on this very top one, it'll bring it in and gives you a graph. You can go back in time as far as you need to go back in time. You can go back to 1947, not on all of them. It depends on which one you're looking at. I looked at housing. Housing only went back about 20 years, so it depends on what you're looking at. So there you have apparel, have it all the way back, and you can notice, just looking at the graph, there's been zero inflation in apparel. Why? Well, because everything's been shifted overseas, into emerging countries, and textile has really gone overseas. Now, what if you want this in Excel, right? You want this in Excel, you can just come down here. There's the Excel right there. And you've got, and sorry, you on the Zoom won't be able to see that, but there you have it. Now you've got your index. I'm going to shift over to that. Sorry, this is the very negative part of Zoom. So I got to keep shifting back and forth. So now we got, well, here I have it. Apparel. I actually brought 3 of them in. So this is for the apparel, but I brought 2 others in earlier. I brought in apparel, used car, and gasoline. Okay, so what do? Y'all know how to handle an index like this? So you need a percent, right? You need to know what the percentage change is. So hopefully y'all know how to do CAGRs, right? Y'all familiar with CAGRs? So you got the starting point. You don't want to count the starting point, but the month after the starting point, put a 1 there and just add 1 all the way down so you know how many months you have. Okay. Now that goes back to 1947. What did you see in that graph that we want to look at? Well, since 1990, we're going to show that textile prices have not risen in 30 years. So I'm going to also start this in 1990. Well, to start at 1990, I want to go back. I want my first month to be December 89. And I'm going to start there. I'm going to copy that down. Go down to the bottom. So how do you, when you get these CPI indexes, how do you get the annual inflation? Anybody know the formula for that? Any takers on that? You don't remember that formula? How you do CAGRs? Ending over beginning. That sound familiar? Raised to the 12 divided by n. Does that look familiar? I remember how to do that. You take the last number, divided by the beginning number, raise it to the 12. Why to the 12? It's monthly data. So we've got 12, how many months we have, divided by the n. Remember the n, I started on that second month, not on the first month, because the first month's your base. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do equal the ending value divided by the beginning value, raised to the 12 divided by that minus 1. Oops, that doesn't look right, but okay. 12%. Oh, sorry. Let me do that again. I thought it was in another one. Okay, so here's 1947, here's from 1990. So 47 equal, ending divided by beginning, raised to the 12 divided by the n, minus 1. So there's the inflation over that entire period. Any questions how I just did that? That's how you get inflation numbers. You can obviously do the graph, but you also want to know the numbers. So for the last 70 years, apparel has probably been below inflation. I think inflation over that period was probably about 3%. You could obviously get overall inflation. How would you do that? Did exactly what I just did, but go back and get that CPI number, the very first one that you saw when you came in. All right. Now let me do it from 1990. Any guesses what it's going to be from 1990? Probably a negative number, right? Not quite negative, so it probably depend on exactly where I started, but pretty close to zero. There's been zero inflation in apparel costs for the last 30, 40, wow, 30 years, 31 years, all right? Any questions on that? I can't tell if you are following me or not. You do graphs over time. Make sure if you do graphs over time, that you work on the formatting of the graph. So a graph like that, 120, that 120 doesn't mean anything to me. So I don't like a graph like that. So I would probably start it at 1 and then grow it. So I just take $1 times this month's value divided by prior month's value. I just copy that down. So essentially, instead of starting at $1.19, I'm going to start at $1. That way I can say $1 of apparel in 1990 would it cost you $1.02 today. That's not 2% inflation, is it? Because that's 2% over 20 years. So whatever, it's pretty close to zero. And then I would graph that because I think that graph's going to look a whole lot better. So $1, it ends up essentially back $1 at the end. So if you want to make a point that clothing prices just are not going up, that's pretty important, right? If you're doing American Eagle, people are not spending more money on clothes, probably because the production of clothes has gotten a lot cheaper. And it's not China anymore, is it? All that's been outsourced from China to the Philippines and Vietnam. So it's, you know, and this is an issue about, you know, sweatshops and dangerous places to work and those kind of issues that Nike's had to worry about and other firms. It's great, it's really cheap, but what are the working conditions there? That's certainly an issue on the supply side you have to worry about. And then make sure you always think about the format of the axis. So my goal, I want to get rid of as much white space as I can. So on this one, I might start it at 0.95 and do it like that. And then I see, okay, that's fine. 0.95 to 115, just so I can see more white space. I remember I was at UTSA, the real estate company, they wanted to make the point that something wasn't changing much. And so they did a graph like that. And I was like, well, obviously it's not changing much if your axes are out of whack. But it was like, can you change your axis? When they changed the axis, it was actually growing quite dramatically. It's like, okay, that you're kind of cheating there. So 0.85 to 1.15. The goal is just get rid of the white space so you can see the moving around. That way people can see, oh, why we hit a peak in this year and it's coming down. Obviously, put the dates down there. Hopefully y'all know how to do graphics, that kind of thing. Get the dates in there, pretty it up. We're going to talk about this a lot in paper 3, but it's true in this paper. So make sure you get this in your notes because this is part of the grading. whenever you have a graph anywhere in your paper, make sure the title of the graph explains why you put the graph in the paper. So if you want to say flat apparel prices for 20 years, or is it 20 years or 30 years? Then the second line says apparel prices 12/31/1989 equal $1. So the top, if your purpose of you putting the graph in is to show that apparel prices have essentially been flat for 30 years, then make that your title. And then the second line just says what the graph is actually doing. All right.
Can you show the formula again for that column?
For which column?
For the last one, the one that you made the graph.
All right, so I wanted to start with $1. And so the next one, you just take the $1 times this month divided by the prior month. So you're essentially just increasing it by the increase. You're essentially converting this column, but instead of starting a dollar, huh? Yeah.
This one divided by.
Yeah, once you have the $1, here, let me- once you have the $1, then you just take that $1 times current month divided by the previous month, and you can just copy that down. And you're going to get the exact same graph you would have gotten here, except that you're going to start at $1 instead of $1.90. And most people, if you start at $1 and they see you start at $1 and you end at $1.02, that their mind can handle that better than $1.19 going to $1.20. So, I mean, 119 to 120. All right. So
Next one, divided by.
yeah. So I took the $1 times this current month that I'm in divided by the previous month. So it's just gonna grow up by the same percentage as that column, except I'm gonna be starting it from 1. We're gonna do that in paper 3 as well. I do that same thing in paper 3 with revenue versus expenses. So find ways to really tell your story. All right, if it's easier to convert it, then convert it to a different number so you can see. Now, used cars. What do you think the story with used cars is? What's the graph going to show that's going to really shock you with used cars? Yeah, the last few years. So here's something where you can just take the inflation rate. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You can just take annual inflation rates. So used cars were getting cheaper back here. And then you can graph that. That's just the annual increase. And does anything stand out there? COVID, used car prices. Any of y'all try buying a car here? You probably do bicycles the same way. So that's an impressive chart just to show, yeah, they're pretty volatile, but what we've seen here in the last 12 months is just off the charts. The record is 45% increase in car prices in 1 year. That's pretty amazing. Used cars, 45% increase. My mom accidentally bought a car a couple years ago and she doesn't drive anymore. She paid way too much. She got ripped off. And so I emailed my brother, said, why don't we just sell her car? I mean, we might almost get the price back. And my brother's like, well, that sounds good, except for I'm driving it now for free. And I kind of like that. Okay, now that that's on the video, but it's like, okay, fine, forget it. I just thought we got a car just sitting there. So it's a pretty amazing thing that people are spending this much. So that really stands out. So there's something you can certainly do. What about gasoline? What has gasoline been doing the last several decades? So again, if you want to start it with 1, you start with $1. That times the current month divided by the previous month. Just copy that down. This doesn't mean the gas is $26. What that is there's some index, who knows where, and that index has grown up to $26. So there you see gasoline over time. Obviously, you see the 70s. But what's happened since the 70s? Gas is just going sideways. Gasoline's going sideways. So you can get this number. Now, the downside is, what I don't like about their site, let me get back there. So you're in this site, there are some things that just seem so obvious. So if I'm doing apparel, I might be interested in cotton, right? So I type in cotton, no records match the search criteria. Are you kidding me? You don't have cotton? I know they have it, but I didn't type the right word. You could put oil in there. Oil comes up all over the place. Why didn't cotton come up? What are some of y'all's industries now? Someone's you were talking about copper, right? Copper would be an obvious one, right? And there's no records. Now copper, most commodities you can get somewhere else. Not too much trouble, but why isn't copper there? Why don't they call it copper?
Maybe like the USSA, like a top 10 exporter or like miner.
Well, it's whatever they go out and do their survey with. So this is all US based, so maybe that's the case since they don't have that one. I did put housing in there. Sometimes you have to type it just right. So I think if you type the word house, nothing comes up, but you type housing. So this is what I don't like with this site. If you don't type it exactly the right word, you can't find it. Or,
I didn't know like timber.
timber. Now timber you can probably find somewhere else. The problem with timber is, well, they don't have it. The problem with timber is such a local market that you probably want to know northeast, south, it's all over the place. But yeah, so it's very frustrating site. There may be an easier way to use it than what I'm doing, but it's not easy. And here you can see the second one up there is San Francisco, obviously because they're having serious housing affordability issues. So it's by most popular. Sometimes to me, just by having it most popular, I'm kind of curious. When I did, I forget what I did. I think I did education maybe. Alaska's the top one up there. Why is that? Why are people really looking for education inflation in the state of Alaska? I don't know why that is. All right. What other companies are y'all doing that we might be able to find something here? Shipping. Well, the Baltic Dry Index is the obvious one to do there, but we can try shipping. And nothing comes up. I've tried like jet fuel before and nothing comes up. I've tried just fuel. I'm pretty sure they have jet fuel, but they don't have it in that word, in that term, so I can't find it. But I put fuel up there and a lot of things come up, but do you really want to look through 235 things? Now, you can extend it up to 100 in a page, so you can go down quickly. But so they almost have too much information here, and you just gotta hunt and hunt and hunt till you can find what you're looking for. But there's a good chance it's out there. It's a great site. It's got thousands of things in it. If I take this last part out, so there's 8,094 pieces of data. There's a pretty good chance one of those 8,000 things relates to your paper that you can bring in and find. All right, so you just have to hunt around. Food in U.S. city average, all urban consumers seasonally adjusted. All right, so Beatrice, you're doing Cisco Foods, so Beatrice, you can get food prices. That fits, right? You could probably just type the word food. Obviously, food is one because they do CPI X food, X energy. So obviously that one's pretty straightforward to do. If you do bananas, that comes up. So I mean, there are things that you can find, and there's, to me, cotton is the one I just don't understand. Why isn't cotton coming up? So if you did textiles, I don't know if that would come up. No. So yeah, someone needs to work on their site. Probably what they need is every time they add one, they should have a longer list of linkages terms, that are closely related. Textile without the X. Yeah, that's how picky it is. How did you spell textile? Did I spell it wrong?
What if you take out like that? So there's
There you go. All right. Well, let's see if cotton works. Maybe that's my problem. No, there's no cotton.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Is that cotton, right? Ah, there you go. Okay, it is there. All right, so I must have had the consumer or whatever. Okay, thank you. Wow, you put all our smart people here in the room, help me out here. All right, so, and then if you do by popularity, good chance, the very first one. And so that was actually a PPI, not a CPI, so that kind of makes some sense. Now, it says it's not seasonally adjusted. That's probably okay because you're looking at long-term trends. Seasonally adjusted, you know, that's month to month to month to month. That's probably not an issue for you, so you can probably ignore that. I usually convert things into annual numbers, and then the seasonal adjustment doesn't matter, or even 5 years. Sometimes you can do a good chart. If your chart is like really, really messy, then instead of doing annual numbers, do 5 years. And show 5-year moving average to see, or 10 years. You know, there's different ways you can do it. So, you know, use your judgment on what tells the story. Let's see how far back cotton will go. Now we found it. Wow, we can go back to 1926. That's pretty impressive. So what have cotton prices done since 1926? Pretty well sideways. Now it does look like they had more data here versus back there. Do you need to go back to 1926? You know, there's, just because you have the data doesn't mean you should show it, right? So, you know, use your judgment on what kind of story you're going to tell. But very, very quickly, we were talking about productivity in my earlier class. If I'd done this, if I've been teaching this class in 1980, how long, what I just did, how long would that have taken? A couple of years, probably. I remember when I was at UT, I went to UTSA, the UT library, and they had these massive books of stock prices. And you could go back and get a book if 10 cents the copy. Y'all don't even know what a copier is. 10 cents the copy. I would walk in with just $20, $30 of change in my pockets, and you just stand all day at the copy machines. But then once you get all the data, what are you gonna do with it? There's no place to type it into. There was no Excel. There was no computers. So you just got on a calculator and you calculated numbers and you put that in your paper. So productivity is pretty impressive. What the things I'm doing here in class would have just been completely unthinkable back then. One thing I do recommend is when you get these files, go to that top line and do Alt HMC and take that big row at the top out. And the reason I say to do that, if you don't do that, you do the end up and you accidentally hit that one, it selects the entire thing. All right, and that irritates the life out of me. I like using the control button, so just Alt HMC, it takes that out, and then when you go up, if you go too far, you can just arrow. Once it selects everything, you can't get out of it. So I just recommend, as soon as you bring it in, Alt HMC, H, I forgot all the stands for. M is, C is center, merge, so you're unmerging the cells, whatever that means. All right, so y'all know how I'm getting around, all right? Everybody knows how to get up and down, control up and down arrow, control shift to highlight it, all that kind of stuff. I have students, I see do this, and oh my word, if I see you doing that, I'm gonna probably go over and turn your computer off. So start all over again, because anybody that's using the mouse is like that. It's just not the way to go. So make sure you're using the control shift or whatever to get around. And the same thing here, right? If you're doing $1, I see students do this, all right? You never do that. How much time do you have? I mean, it's like, well, I'd rather this paper take me 30 hours to write than 10. If that's your goal, but just double click right there and you got it. But I see students doing that. It's like, guys, that gives me, actually I think I'm gonna start suing students for my heart condition because it really gives me a heart attack. It's like, how can you do that? So anyway, there you have it. So now you have it in a dollar basis, and it's pretty quickly, you got a pretty good chart there. You can see starting with $1, you end up at $2-something. What is that in percentage terms? Probably not that high in numbers since you're going back to 1926. All right. So that was the slide I want to show you for inflation. I don't know if you'll be able to find any better inflation numbers than that. That's pretty impressive data. How much was it? I mean, I should have looked before I. If it was 8,000 with the CPI, then what was it? Yeah, I don't know if that's everything, but there's 35,000. So if we get the 8,000, 35,000, that's a lot of data, right? So there's no way you're going to look through 35,000 items. So you're going to have to really just, do your best to put the word in there that does the search. All right. On here, these tables are the most current releases. So there might be more data, more information in there. This is actually better if you're writing a paper that's short term. I mean, what Eduardo's doing for the Investment Society, these kind of sources that he would use, the more recent kind of stuff. All right. What else can you do? Well, one thing I do in Google, the St. Louis Fed has a lot of data. So I was talking about buyer power for the U.S. consumer. So you can do personal income data Excel. Whatever you're looking for, just type what you're looking for and then data Excel. The Fed used to have the FRED add-in. I don't know if y'all remember that thing. I don't even use that anymore because this to me is so much easier. So you're looking for this word FRED. FRED is the, well, I don't know what the FRED stands for, but FRED is FRED. So, and you just click on it and they'll dump it into Excel for you. To me, that's a lot easier than using the FRED add-in. And so here you have it, personal income. You can see the effect of COVID because it really had a huge impact. Those government distributions really impacted it. You can adjust it around. So you can edit the graph. So if you're looking for a percentage change, you want some other way, you can try other things. This one actually works pretty well for me. So I can download that into Excel. Now I've got personal income. I'm not going to stop sharing for those that are out there. So now I've got personal income back to 1959. All right, that's pretty cool. And I want to compare that to something. So let me compare it to consumer credit. And there it is, consumer credit. Now you can adjust it if you want to. Now here you gotta find it. We're looking for total consumer credit, owned and securitized. So we just want total. One thing on this, make sure you read definitions. So when you see consumer credit, this number, unless they change it, but this number does not include home equity and mortgage debt. So it includes credit cards, autos, but you'd want to know that, right? That's going to be pretty important, what's in that number and not in that number. So I'm going to bring that number in. And so, well, it goes way, way, way back to 1943, but my personal income only goes back to 1959. So you might change it there if you want to, so you don't have to bring it in. So 1959. Put it to Excel. I'm not sure it updated it. I didn't see an update button, so let's see. Did it work? Yeah, it looks like it worked. And so here, okay, sorry. All right, so here's my personal income. And then I'm going to go over and get the consumer. Here's my consumer credit, my personal income. Here's my personal income. Let me bring that down and copy it over to my consumer credit. So there I've got consumer credit. There I got personal income. So what might I do? Well, I can't graph those two things. I got 48 and 391. So what might I do? Well, again, create my own index. So here's personal income. Oops. You have to start it with the first number. You can't start it before that. So I start that with $1 current month divided by the prior month. Do the same thing with credit. Current month divided by the prior month. Put that down. And then you can see the growth in credit is far outstripped the growth in income. And that can be, interesting chart. Why is that? It's because U.S. consumers are borrowing too much, or is because we didn't have a good banking system back in the 40s and 50s. It amazes me the whole term layaway today. Have y'all heard that term? People are doing layaway. That was like disappeared with the credit card, and now it's all back. But your grandparents, that's all they could do. There was no credit card. They put it in the back of the store, and your grandparents went in and paid, $5 every month or so, and then 12 months later, you got your bicycle kind of thing. So that's coming back for some strange reason. But anyway, consumer credit has been growing faster, and then you might ask, well, what was the shift? I don't know what year that is. If you put the years in there, you're trying to get that sense of what's going on, and then you can look more recently. You can definitely see recessions. You'll notice most recessions, consumer credit drops pretty dramatically. We saw it with COVID. Consumer credit dropped pretty dramatically. But you'll find a couple of recessions where that didn't happen. Consumers just kept borrowing, and that's kind of scary that they're under strain, but they keep borrowing and keep borrowing. And we definitely saw that in the late, in 2005, 2006, 2007, where people were borrowing against their house, going out and buying everything. It was like they were using their house like an ATM. I'm not saying this is a great chart, but just show you how quickly I can get data and get a fairly decent chart in just a matter of a few seconds. It's pretty amazing. All right. So that's a really good trick. Just type exactly what you want into the search bar, into Google or Bing or whatever Bing or whatever you're using. Vehicle miles driven is a great one. You put the word Excel and data together. There's another Fred right there. Pretty good. How much do you think it's dropped off here recently? Curious to see. Can you tell where COVID hit? Pretty dramatic, right? What did we go back to? What, my word, we drove the same number of miles so we lost 20 years of miles in 1 month. So why would this be important? Well, you're going to assume that line's going to come back up, so that can help you with forecasting when you get to paper 5 and 6 as far as growth rates. If you're doing Valero or somebody, so it can help you put that into context. Now this is the U.S. Can you get this number for the world? Because we know China's driving a lot more. Other countries are driving a lot more. India. I do think miles driven dropped globally. The U.S. you can see the drop off here. The U.S. miles drop, but worldwide miles are still growing because of emerging countries. This is pretty interesting that we actually saw this decline for several years there. Was that because of the financial crisis? It looks like people not driving to work kind of things. But there's a lot of interesting stories in these numbers. You could certainly relate this to gasoline prices or whatever else you want to do, regressions or correlations kind of things, and all the stuff you learn in stats, you can bring into this class and try to find some interesting relationships. Try stuff. If you try stuff, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I don't know how many times I've looked for a correlation between two things and boy, it just wasn't there. You can put that into your paper. You might say there should be an obvious correlation between miles driven and gas prices, but I couldn't find it because miles driven is a fairly stable number and gas prices is a fairly volatile number. And you also have a supply versus demand kind of phenomenon going on. But try it, see if the relationship's there. The advantage you have is you can dump this in Excel. You can do the correlation in a few seconds, see if there's something there. If you're doing correlations, one thing to always be careful of is the way the data is reported. So if I were doing a correlation, I might try month versus month, and then I might lag it 1 month either way, just in case there's a lag in the data. So you might find zero correlation, and you lag it 1 month, and suddenly you pick up a correlation. So do some experimenting to see what's going on. And one way you can tell correlations really easily is to do that $1 thing I did with the two data pieces and graph them. And you can often see correlations. And if there's a lag problem, you'll be able to see the lag and be able to line it up better, right? Does that make sense? So do some experimenting. This is a time, all that stats was your most important class you took. This is a chance to bring that data into a paper. So, boy. So some of y'all are doing semiconductors. I think the book to bill has disappeared, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's,
So can you get the historical data? Is any value to you?
it only goes back to like 2017. That's what-
Yeah, I don't know why they stopped that, but can you find the data? Is there something that substitutes for it? But even then, you can see the Fred doesn't come up on that one. And so that's kind of frustrating because you're not going to get it in Excel. Boy, I'm trying to think of some of your industries. I can't think of any obvious ones to put in there. House prices. There are two really famous house price index. There's existing houses and new houses. That data you should be able to get. Sometimes the data is not the federal government. It's coming from the conference board or something like that, and that they won't give you that for free, so you just can't keep your hands on it. But that might be in Statista. So a lot of stuff I'm looking at might be in Statista. I don't know how much economic data Statista has, but so that data might be there. But that looks pretty good. The Census Bureau, that's a government agency, so their data should be free. So someone yell out your company name. Costco. Well, I would probably bring up something like online sales and just see, well, that didn't work too well, but you should be able to find something, what percentage of sales are online versus in stores. And that should be a pretty good number to put in your first paper. Costco.
Have something like that on the sheet, or do we need to go find another?
Statista would probably have that. That would be a pretty obvious one for Statista, yeah. The problem with typing some stuff into Google is the word online sales is going to take you a million other places than what you're looking for. So you have to be precise. But I mean, be precise. I remember a student came up to me once and said, I can't find anything on the movie industry. And so I went, movie industry. And all this stuff came up. It was like, look, all this free data. It's like, why did you type in the Google? It was like, there were industry trade groups, and you clicked on it, and there was like 50 Excel things you could try. Why did you type? Well, I typed, I don't know, just a bunch of random letters, and nothing came up. It's like, yeah, that's probably why. And so type the obvious stuff in Google, and stuff will come up if it's out there. It will work. You might try typing the word Fred and just see if the Federal Reserve has it. They bring it in really. I love what they've done here. It's so much easier to deal with. Used to do a CBX file and you had to convert and all that, but now it's just, you just click on the button. And they edit the graph. They have several choices there. You can change monthly to quarterly. You know, there's a lot of things you can do to get what you need, and then you just click and it brings it in. So yeah, whoever's working at the Fed for their data is doing a great job. All right, so the last thing I want to do here, this is using negative of Zooms. I wish Zoom had something where it would just automatically shift screens as you shift screens.
If you just hit screen and put share.
All right.
Right below that, where it says welcome. And you put dark.
Right here, you talking about?
Is that? Very nice. Right there. And you should share from there.
Share? I don't have to click on what I'm going to share.
Bottom right, yeah, right, bottom
Oh,
right.
really?
And it should be fine.
Oh, wow. Okay, wow, thank you. I'm glad my students are smarter than I am. Especially with technology. All right. So let's look at a couple of student examples. Some of y'all been asking, well, I know y'all been looking at these anyway. There's one I wanted to show y'all last semester. Adobe. So this is a very recent one. I want to show you a recent one because I have changed the format somewhat. So first of all, he did an excellent job of getting the sell side. That looks very sell sidey, doesn't it? He did a really good job. He looked at a few examples. It looks a little small, but it's really not too bad. I mean, he's got a lot of stuff stuffed in there. Probably the biggest negative is that paragraph is just way too long. So he should have broke that up. But other than that, he did a good job. I don't care about a table of contents. You can put one in if you like. That might be better for you if you want to do it. But if you're going to do a table of contents, wait to the very, very end to put it in there. I'm sure Word has a way to do it for you, so you can link it all up. All right. So now he does his industry. You start off with some kind of definition of industry. What am I looking at? What's included? What's not included? All right. So if you're doing retail, so if you're doing Costco or Target, is your definition of industry going to include Amazon or not? So when you say Target, well, I'm only doing companies that have the major part of business is an actual box retail store. Or are you going to include the online? All right, so you define that. The overview usually is who are the major players. Or if you're doing software, it might be what are the major products. All right, I was talking to someone on energy. Energy is almost always upstream, midstream, downstream. That's almost 100% of the time where they go next. All right. A lot of time technology is what are the major products, what we're looking at. A lot of them will talk about the major players in the industry. So he has that here, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, and Google. His paragraphs are too long, so you need to break up your paper much more than that. So I prefer, and have never seen one yet, so one of y'all needs to do this, is to find some way to graphically show who the major players are. Maybe a table that distinguishes and what distinguishes this company and this company. Reading through all that text is just really, really cumbersome. Not just for me as a professor, but for whoever's reading your paper. So if you can find a way to distinguish, now he's doing Adobe, but he's bringing in Microsoft, he's bringing these other big tech companies. He has a chart that shows the size of the companies. I love what he does here, 2015 and 2020. That's a really good idea because it gives you a good sense of the growth of these companies. Just, you know, this is a great chart you could copy definitely. Really easy to do, just right off of Capital IQ. You just bring in revenues. Now, granted, if you're doing Microsoft, Microsoft does more than software. So you're gonna have some mixing. These companies tend to just do software, so that worked pretty well for them. This revenue growth can be pretty powerful. If you try to show who's the fastest growing and show them over time, you can easily do that as well. That would work better if you do that from Bloomberg rather than doing it from Capital IQ. I like what he's doing here. Who are the end users? That makes a lot of sense. We've talked about that. If you're selling to another business, but that other business is selling to someone else, a consumer, then bring that in as well. So he's done a pretty good overview here. And then he gets into Porters. Now, he gives a definition, an intro Porter. You don't need to do that. Everybody knows Porter now. If you want to, I don't count off on it, but that's fine. But he gave an introduction. And then he just goes in to each one, threats, bargaining. So you can see his suppliers is a big part of it with some graphics. And that's probably what's going to be the case for you. You have one that's a paragraph, and then the next one might go for a page, 2 or 3, just because you have a lot more discussion. So your buyer and supplier power are going to be an issue there. He talks about skilled labor. You might want to look and see what he did there. He got his from Statista. Some of you are asking about your bibliography. Statista is not a good source to put down, but I'll let you get away with it in this class. Statista is getting it from somebody else. You should probably find your ultimate source and document that. But for this class, we don't have to be quite that pristine on the data. So Statista is good enough to put there. Again, his paragraphs, I will count off if your paragraphs are too long. So one trick I like to use is if you get over 10 lines, it's probably too long of a paragraph. If you're doing one column, 5 lines, if you're doing double columns, 10 lines, it's just too long. All right. He talks about the visas, the H-1B visas. So you see, he got some pretty good data, some pretty good charts that he found in Statista. So his supplier went on forever, and then he gets the buying power. Has some charts in there. This is a little rough here, so it's a little small. I might convert this into words rather than putting a big chart. Since he's only talking about a couple of lines there, I'd probably convert that to something else. Threat of substitutes. So somehow he has a lot of substitutes. Now he put switching costs under threat of substitutes. That's probably because of that's where I had it in the notes. Where would I put switching costs? Buyer power, yeah, it makes a lot more sense than buyer power. But you know, he did what I had in the notes, so that's okay. He talked about piracy as a substitution threat. You could certainly do that. That could make some sense for software. He was getting creative there. And then rivalry. And then he copied my format there in the end, so I'm glad students will do that. He even had dark green and light green and orange and red, so he got pretty precise there. And then lanes positive. Now this is my format. If you can come up with a better format, that's fine. You don't have to use mine, but some way that's included all. And the reason this is so important is you want a final conclusions. And a lot of students, where you're going to lose most of your points, if you get to your final conclusion, you never mention anything you just did. Some students, they just kind of off the top of their head saying, well, I really like this industry. It's really great. It's got a lot of good stuff. But no, you just talked you just spent, what, 10 pages talking about this industry. Bring that back. What were the most important things you learned there? So don't introduce all brand new stuff in your conclusion. All right, so that took him about 10 pages to do that, or maybe. So paper 1 tends to be the longest, tends to be the most intense, and you can see that's about 10 pages. That seems about right. He probably would have gone 15 pages if his paragraphs hadn't been so long. So this is a pretty good example paper. That's really the only negative I would say on him is the paragraph length, and then a few places with his charts are a little bit hard to read. But you can see why the thin margin is so important. You can imagine how bad this would have looked if he had a 1-inch margin. It just would have been so squished up. So squeeze that down as much as you can. All right, so I'm going to leave paper 1 unless y'all are like, wow, I have no clue what I'm supposed to do. So, the paper's due next week. If you're a little late on it, and I'm not quite as strict on this class as my others. I don't like to encourage you to be later because it bunches up the rest of the semester, which is pretty rough. But this is the hardest paper. So if we're a little late on any paper, this is probably the one it could be, but just assume it's due next week and get it done. So this weekend, there's probably at least a few students in the class that haven't even started yet. So that's scary. I just saw a student from this class who was like that. Not because he hadn't started, because he read so much. He had so much stuff and he just could never, and then the last second he'd write it, but he could write really good papers off the top of his head. So he did really well. He was just, and Will, you were there. He said this class is really good. He really liked it. Of course, he's, because I'm sitting there, but he was quite valuable. He did a great job in this class, but he was continuously late. But he got good papers, but you may not be like that. You may not be able to write a great 15-page paper at 2 a.m. the day before it's due. So spread it out. This is a good class to figure out your work discipline. So I want to move to paper 2. Get a little bit of introduction there, but any last questions on paper 1? I don't need an official bibliography. If your source is like what he did, Statista, that's fine enough for me. If you're quoting something, since you know that Statista, you can probably find that again. My main point on these papers as far as bibliography, if you have something, you should be able to have enough in your paper you can find it again. All right. The downside with having your link be like an internet link is that internet links change. So I would at least have the source and the date you got it, so you can find it again. If you can find it again, I'm happy with that. I don't mind, not having a full bibliography at the end. All right, I got it. I got good examples. Is there anyone in here who there's not a single student example out there that's anywhere close to your company? Beatrice, you might have. I don't know if there's anyone. Aaron. Yeah, there aren't too many on the discretionary side. Yeah, that's true. You'd probably do well. I don't know if there's even a Target or a Costco out. There's maybe a Costco out there. I can't remember. Yeah, consumer. Well, okay. So Aaron and those of you doing Target and the others, give me a great paper so we can get an example paper out there. You have Amazon, but that's kind of other stuff in it. Yeah, there's not a lot of consumer retail out there, is there? Go ahead. There's no Best Buy. Yeah. So what? There's no real estate, because real estate, yeah, is not very common at all. A lot of tech, a lot of energy. Amazon's about the only retail I have there. So y'all need to write me some great retail papers this semester. So I have something to put out there as an example.
Is there any for chemicals and materials?
No, I don't remember any in that line. Although some of these, like Bell and some of those on the energy side, they can be pretty interesting. You do have some on the apparel side. I'm surprised there's not a Nike out there. I thought I did these in alphabetical order, but obviously not. You got semiconductor there. You got a restaurant there. The Chipotle paper. Some of these papers are old, so you may not see the porters the way we talked about in this class. So on the Chipotle paper, he did a great job defining the industry, but his porter side may not work well. So be careful. Some of these papers are quite aged, especially the General Dynamics one. That was written the first time we ever did this paper, the very first semester. So that thing is, oh my word, I think he's a grandfather now. I can't, that was many years ago. So, right, and call me if you're not sure. I'll try to help you out. But this weekend's gonna be pretty critical for this paper. I should be available a lot the next several days. And I will be on campus. I'm thinking I'm probably just going to be on campus Monday through Thursday, just from now on. So if you need access to the FSC, you can certainly come in there and use it. It was kind of rough tonight because we were talking so loud, but it usually won't be that loud in there. All right, so y'all ready for paper 1? Paper one's probably going to be the most helpful one for you when it comes to jobs. Oh, I wasn't supposed to do that, was I? Did I just mess it up? All right, so I have, okay, boy, give me another 5 years and I'll have it down. All right, so now we get to company two. Company two tends to be an easier, well, I did give you a bunch of links in the notes for some places for economic data. So you might see some of those, might be good for your particular company. And I gave you a lot of, gave you a lot of very common economic data. So most of these, or many of these, if you type this into Google with Excel data, something will probably come up, Fred data or something like that will help you with that. Semiconductor billings, is that one still around? Have you tried that one? That's not around. I think the industry's changed so much they just gave up on those.
Yeah,
All right.
a lot of companies just stopped exposing that.
Yeah, well, you know, it's, I don't know how it's, you know, I don't know how to go. I think on some of these you have to do it by law. And some of the stuff you're going to find when you do paper three is what we call as reported data, like number of employees, square feet. And that's the data companies report if they feel like it. And so you're going to find like an employment data, you've got 5 years and then no data, and then 4 years and no data. And it's like, there's nothing you can do. You can probably find the missing years if you go to any report and look it up, those kind of things, but it's frustrating. All right, so now your company analysis. This is where you want to define your company in relation to paper one. So paper one, you define the industry. How does your company fit into that industry? All right, is it a cost leader? It differentiates. How does it differentiate? Is it focus? What's its focus market? So try to fit your company in. And who are its key competitors? One thing you're going to do is a management analysis. So let me talk a little bit about management analysis. So y'all heard of ESG, right? You're hearing those terms a lot more. Unfortunately, my career was all pre-ESG. We didn't care about it. Kill the environment, be socially horrible. We don't care about governance. Just do whatever you want to do. And now that's a big deal, and you have to follow it. Bloomberg does have an ESG function. So if you bring up your company and type FA for financial analysis, a bunch of buttons come up, and one of the buttons is ESG. You might go look at that for your company and you see what they have. Bloomberg might have a score on governance, might have a score on environment and on social. But I like what Dan Darren says. Your main goal with management is, are they trying to maximize shareholder value? And there's a way to tell that they're doing that. So you want a management that has the stockholders as their top priority. They have a board of directors that also has stockholders at heart. Yeah, I would love to be on a board of directors. You meet like 4 times a year. You get paid $50,000, $100,000 for 4 meetings. That's kind of nice. But most of these board members have full-time jobs somewhere else. So this board is probably not their high priority. So I'm not so sure the whole board thing is all that powerful about a protection for stockholders. The other problem is you put board members on your board and then your board member on their board. You have all these CEOs that are board members, and now you're going to vote on a management pay package. Guess what their thought process is going to be? I'm sure not going to deny your pay package because I sure want you to approve mine. So, there's I think some interesting dynamics here. The only boards I've dealt with have been USAA boards. And they're not always that knowledgeable of the industry they're in. So you might actually go and look at the board members of your company and see what their background is. Jabbar, do they have real estate background? They lots of background. So at USAA, it was a bunch of military people. I remember we met one of the board members. He had a master's degree in mathematics or something. I mean, this guy was pretty advanced, and I was really excited to talk to him. He walks in the office and we say stocks, and he says, "Oh, I don't know anything about that stuff." Okay, you're working for a financial services company? He goes, "No, I don't know that stuff." He was an engineer, he was military, smart guy, obviously, but didn't know anything about financial services. And so it was like, wow. The USA's mutual fund board, there was a professor from UTSA on that board. There's a professor from Rice University, which was wonderful. She actually developed the VIX index. So I was like, wow, I got to meet the VIX index creators. That was really cool. She sent me all this data and I left it at USA, unfortunately. It's like really disappointing, but really bright. But she was really the first person who was really knowledgeable of the industry she was on the board for. So I would look at that. Who are these people that are in this industry? What's their background? If you're doing energy, Exxon, energy is a very complicated field. You got the CEO from GameStop. Yes. How are they going to go from their company and come look at Exxon, which is this massive company? So how much does the board actually do? How independent is the board? How many board members are there? A lot of firms have way too many board members, and we should be shortening it down. How independent is the board? I remember the board I had to deal with, our CEO was on that board, and if the board chair started saying something he didn't like, he's like, no, you guys don't need to worry about that. He's like, that's my job, that's not your job. And he was very protective, that kind of thing. We had one board member, I'm convinced this board member, need to get these packets about this thick. I think she went in and she read one page in detail, and then that was her question. And said, wow, she really studied. And that was it. She was done for the rest of the meeting. I was like, okay, she maybe wasn't as prepared, but that's pretty smart, right? It makes it sound like you really studied. So you do have some SEC filings you might look into. I'm not as familiar with these filings, but there may be some places you can go and see. Capital IQ supposedly has some stuff. Yahoo Finance has some stuff. Bloomberg has some stuff. So it might be every company has something radically different available. So you might just have to go down and look at the ESG report for your particular company. I'm not sure about Market Line. I haven't looked to see if they have ESG reports or Merchant Online. I don't know if y'all tried that, but just look around and see what you can find. How do you have evidence the board and the management are not looking out for the stockholders? What protections they have in place in case there's a hostile takeover? If this firm has something in place, if there's a hostile takeover, they're going to just crush the firm. They're going to have to pay the CEO millions of dollars. I love the CEO of Merrill Lynch. After you destroyed Merrill Lynch, you got what, $160 million of severance. So you destroyed our company. You're gonna have to leave, and all you're getting is $160 million. Like, yeah, okay, I'll destroy them for half that. So you're looking for these kind of things. Conflicts of interest between the management and the board. Who are the largest stockholders? You probably can get that out of Bloomberg, but it's usually the same three companies, right? Vanguard, BlackRock, it's all the big investment firms. But you might be curious if there is an activist investor. I love firms that have an activist investor coming in, wanting to radically change the firm and change management. That to me is a good sign. You got someone out there who's really fighting for the stockholders, because the problem if your major stockholders are Vanguard, BlackRock, Fidelity, what do they do when they don't like management? They sell the stock and they buy another stock, right? They don't fix anything. Vanguard's not going to fix anything. They got they own everything. They just buy stuff without anything as an index. So that's not going to fix anything. So having an activist investor, someone who's actually going to make sure management is held in check. So institutional investors, they tend to not care. I was an institutional investor. We voted our proxies. We voted maybe 5% of our proxies, 95% of them, we had a proxy firm vote for us. So no one's really looking out for it. Most of the votes, we say we don't care about that. Every once in a while, Michael would bring me a vote and say, hey, this proxy vote, you might want to actually vote this one. I would get calls from people that were activists and they say, you need to vote no on this. So I say, okay, I'd write it down and say, Michael, go check and see, is there something we care about? But most of the time, If you don't like the stock, you just sell it and go buy another one. You're just not gonna mess with it. Self-holdings, companies on pension plans, that's certainly not good. Do they have, how much government influence do they have? It's gonna influence how much they pay in taxes. Different voting rights, like a Google or a Facebook or something like that, that they have certain voting rights to try to protect a founder. That's not a good sign. Family group companies, cross holdings within family groups, founders hanging on. Is it good that Zuckerberg is still at Facebook? Do you want the founders still running the company, or is that a bad thing? That's something you certainly have to think about. And then activist investors, is that going on? What do you want management's objective to be? Dan Darren says the easiest thing is maximize stock price. He says maximize stock price is the same as maximizing the value of the firm. Ultimately, this is what we want. So we'll talk about this in paper 3. We want firms that are focused on return on capital that's greater than cost of capital. So how can you figure this out? We got 1 minute. So one thing, you're probably not going to work on paper 1, but one thing that can help you, I mean on paper 2, but one thing can help you in both paper 1 and paper 2 that you might want to do this weekend is go to YouTube and type your company's CEO on YouTube, and you will find a 20-30 minute discussion of your CEO talking about not just her company, but what else is she going to talk about? Her entire industry. All right, have any of y'all tried that? It's pretty amazing, right? The stuff you can find, especially because of COVID, because a lot of these investment conferences have gone online. And so if you haven't tried that, try that. It can help you with paper 1 and help you with paper 2. All right, we'll talk about a little bit more of that next week. All right, see you. Have a good weekend.